Yeah, hi, welcome. My name's Chris Karson. I'm one of the founders and partners of Northern Alliance, and my my specialty, if you will, or my experience in real estate is mostly commercial. I've done quite a bit of development in the past, developed land, subdivisions, estate lot subdivisions, apartment buildings, building some condos currently. So anyway, I like to approach my trainings from obviously a perspective of my experiences, and environmental is one of my something that I've concentrated on and have to go through with developments. So I've decided to talk about the environment today, and
Mhm.
I try to, you know, show and discuss what it means to us realtors, I guess, helping people through transactions.
Hmm.
So stop me at any time. Feel free to ask questions, and I've designed today for the discussion somewhat of an advanced discussion in environmental. I know I did an environmental last within the last couple trainings of kind of a um, a- I guess a overview of environmental. I was planning on a deeper discussion, but I'll tailor it to whatever you guys are looking for, and so we'll stop me at any time and ask questions. Liam, how are you?
I'm good. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. And Huma's here today. How are you?
Hi, Chris.
What's happening?
Can you hear me?
I can. Yeah, nice to see you.
Yeah, good morning.
Good morning.
How are you doing?
I'm great, thanks. I'm great. I'll
Awesome.
I was just telling Kulvinder you guys rolled in, but I was just kind of briefly introducing the topic for today. We're going to be discussing environmental regulations. It was more of an advanced deep dive, but feel free to ask questions about anything environmentally related or anything. Feel free to stop me. I encourage discussion. So without further ado, I'll just roll right into it. So um, the environmental aspect of real estate transactions, it doesn't come up frequently in simple residential, but it definitely comes into play more when we're discussing commercial and certainly any land or development. So uh, it's an important role to understand. It's a very complex um, facet of the business, and certainly one that a 45-minute discussion is not going to let us know everything that we need to be experts in the field. But what I'm hoping to get out of today is to help you identify when, at the very least, when to refer a client to seek professional help, or when to yourself go and seek more information about the environment and how to protect our clients, both buyers and sellers. So I'll jump right into it. Um, there's one of the biggest reasons why the environment and some of the environmental matters uh, pertain to realty. Certainly in commercial, the first thing we think about for environmental is financing. A bank will not be financing a deal in commercial if there isn't an environmental site assessment attached to the file. So a phase one or a phase two environmental, just briefly, a phase one is kind of a paperwork exercise, if you will. It studies the land or property from a historical perspective. There an environmental consultant obviously goes through some in environmental databases and tries to identify risk of property having contamination. Um, but it's based on visual inspection and historical um, collection of data through databases and talking to neighboring properties and the owner and so forth. So um, that's I'm not going to focus as much today on the ESA. We can talk about it if anybody has questions, but the last environmental class we did, we focused on the ESA. But I just want everybody to understand, obviously, the ESA is often the Bible of a property deal when it comes to commercial or anything land related, or for development. But there's more to the environmental aspects of real estate than just the ESA. Even though it's probably the first one that we need to understand so that we can get a deal done. But there's a bigger picture for the environment holistically with real estate, and especially when we're talking about land and land development. Certainly, any rural lands, any of you that are looking at selling waterfront properties, or you've got rural lands, and there's the uh, vast lands in uh, the rural areas can be constrained by all sorts of different environmental regulations. There can be wetlands and floodplains. There can be uh, different national forests and environmental land, wetland complexes and larger forest complexes that all affect the land and what we can do with it. If a client buys the land and wants to subdivide it or develop it, uh, there's environmental constraints that I'd like to discuss and go on the beyond the ESA today. So a few key categories are natural heritage systems, hydrological constraints, and I'd like to introduce some. Often we're using digital mapping tools in order to identify these. So we'll be looking at a couple different mapping systems that we have available to us today for you guys to um, go on and we can find some of these constraints just at our fingertips online. Um, let's start off by kind of doing a deep dive. I think one of the most known aspects of the environment for um, some of these systems we're talking about are floodplains. So I'll talk about floodplains. We'll put floodplains and wetlands in a similar camp in that we can identify them online. A floodplain is coming from some type of a water course. So you've got um, a lake, a river, a pond. The floodplain is the boundary in which that river or water course will swell. So the river itself, when there's high water events from snow melt or large rainfall, um, the river or the lake will swell. Its banks will swell and encroach on the land. And the floodplain lines are we attempt to predict them and map them, and the municipality along with the conservation authorities determine what these floodplain lines are. They're studied heavily, and they're we use them to identify where there's potential floodplain risk and hazards to humans and human property. So there's different types of floodplain lines. If you were to develop some land or look at a property, I'm going to share my screen here before I go too far and show you some floodplain activity. Um, let me know when, can everybody see my screen?
Yep.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so this is Geo Ottawa. And for those of you that are in Ottawa, this is our Bible, if you will, for environmental identification of environmental aspects. So it's Geo Ottawa. I've got a few key layers turned on, just so you guys can follow along. I've got basically property parcels turned on. I'll turn on the current zoning bylaw regulation, and everything else that I've got turned on is under the planning tab. You toggle over, make sure the planning tab is checked on, and then natural systems and regulated limits. We'll make sure that unevaluated wetlands is turned on within the natural systems. That is usually my main selection for the layers when I'm looking for environmental information, and that's going to get us our floodplains and wetlands regulation limits around the wetlands and protected areas. So I encourage everybody to get familiar with Geo Ottawa. I am asked zoning questions every week from clients and other realtors, or whether I'm searching for property, and it's second nature. You can pull this up on your phone if you need to and identify, zones or floodplain regulation. I'm going to, for floodplain use, I'm going to identify a known area of Ottawa that has flooding issues, and that area is Constance Bay. I'm chuckling a little bit because Liam's here, and he's got a listing in Constance Bay right now that's around the floodplain. I won't focus on his property, but I want to bring your attention to this area. It's a known area of flooding with some serious high water. Within the last 10 years, it's flooded a couple times, and badly. So if we zoom right into the area, again, this is Constance Bay, you'll notice a whole bunch of different things happening within the area. We've got blue shaded area, which happens to be city-owned land. So don't confuse this blue city-owned land with what would be unevaluated wetland, something that would look like this here. So this blue area is city-owned land, but there is, if we zoom in, a lot of floodplain, and there's blue. You'll see these blue lines that are hatched all across all of these properties. In the 100-year flood event status, all of these houses get flooded, and the water from the river goes over the banks and has flooded this entire area multiple times, and that's where you'll see flooding. So if you've got a client looking for a property in this area, any area, as far as I'm concerned, that's near a water course, you should be looking up the property on some type of a system like this, and identifying whether or not it's got floodplain potential. So anyway, there's also, you'll see the regulated limits. Can anybody explain to me what a regulated limit is?
Would that be like a setback or something?
That's a really good way to describe it, is a setback. If I look at this property, for instance, we see this blue is an unevaluated wetland, and we'll discuss wetlands in a moment, but this is an unevaluated wetland, and you'll notice that the regulated limit goes beyond the unevaluated wetland by a certain distance. So if a property has environmental challenges, it gives the governing body, which in this area is the Mississippi Valley Conservation Authority. If a property has these environmental challenges, it gives the regulating body, the governing body, jurisdiction over that land and what you can do within the affected area. So what that means is for this property that we're looking at, if you wanted to build a house within this unevaluated wetland, there would be challenges. You would be asked to do an environmental impact statement or something to study the land uh, to try to develop it and get over those constraints. But that regulated limit goes beyond the boundary of in this case, unevaluated wetland itself, and it gives them jurisdiction for a slightly larger area, a buffer, if you will, or an extension of that boundary, just to make sure that they've got jurisdiction adjacent the environmental um, constrained area as well. Probably a good time to discuss a distinction between um, unevaluated wetland and a provincially significant wetland. Does anybody want to take a crack at what the differences may be between those the two different distinctions of wetland? So there's basically one is just right in the term itself, unevaluated wetland, which this property would fall under the one that we're looking here. And I just randomly pulled up this property. I didn't pick on it for any particular reason, but I see three in this area, unevaluated wetlands, and we can always go over to the legend within GeoOttawa and see what it is we're looking at. This unevaluated wetland you can identify right here in the legend. But in the name unevaluated wetland, it basically states what it is. It's unevaluated. It's what happens is the municipality or the conservation authority, they've got extensive mapping data over the last 30, 40, 50 years, and they take the topographic information from this data and they identify low points. So this blue area is a depression in the land, a low point, if you will, that has limited ability to drain itself. And if they had identified through the topographic studies that there was a big ditch going straight to the river, it would drain that area very well, and it wouldn't necessarily be identified as wetland. But this has been identified. The municipality, they'll fly over with drones now and take LiDAR topographic um, information and determine where they think that wetlands are. But these particular ones are unevaluated. So they've done an initial identification of a low point in the land, but they haven't done extensive study on the area. That's why it's unevaluated. Um, Often in these unevaluated situations, they have overstated what the extent of the wetland actually is. Some of them are wetlands, but some of them are not significant in any way. And if you work on it, and if you're a landowner or a potential buyer, and you work on some of these systems, it's possible that you can get some of that designation of unevaluated wetland removed. If you see just this particular property that I've clicked on here, the majority of this parcel of land is shown here as unevaluated wetland. Now, if you own that property and you want to build a house on it, that's not going to be ideal for you. But I'm willing to bet that it's if you do some homework, you'll find some areas within this land that are not wet that would absolutely be suitable to build a house, or develop in some way. And the municipalities, and the if it's not provincially significant, like in this case, we're seeing unevaluated wetland. The municipality has to let you develop something. This land looks like it's zoned RU. So within that zone, that they would have to let you build something on your land. And what they'll do is, because of this designation, and you'll see the regulated limit takes up the entire property. So no matter what, whoever owns this land, if they want to do something with it, they will be asked to do an EIS, an environmental impact statement, or an environmental impact study, that does more extensive, on the, boots on the ground testing and studying of that land parcel and of that wetland, to determine what risk development would put towards the habitat. And that environmental impact statement will study trees, it will study the water events, and a host of other different parameters that will give whoever's reading that study, the conservation authority or the municipality, whoever's reading that study, it'll give them the ability to make a better informed decision of the land, whether it is absolutely habitat and proper wetland, and then determine what you will be allowed to do with it. So in these cases, I typically see the municipality offer to a landowner what they call a building envelope. And that, if I look here, it looks like, closer to the road, there isn't wetland. You'll see this house here and the neighboring house, they've built it just outside the wetland, but within the regulated limit. So I'm willing to bet in this property, the subject property that we were just talking about here, that they would give you a building envelope. And what a building envelope is it's an area that they'll allow you to build a house, and then in this case put a septic. But they will constrain that area to a particular space, and they'll say, okay, if this whole property is 3 acres or 4 acres, they'll give you maybe an acre along the frontage, furthest away from the wetland that they think it's going to impact the least. They'll give you an envelope in which you can build a house, and it'll be right on a site plan for a survey. And you'll negotiate with the municipality and the conservation authority as to what you can do with the property. I've seen wetlands that have been moved because they've done an environmental impact statement and studies, and there wasn't significant evidence of wetland. And with that study, they're studying bugs and habitat and flora, fauna, the different plants that would grow in a wetland complex. And if some of those things aren't identified, we can sometimes remove this unevaluated wetland designation, if you will, from the conservation authorities' mapping systems and from the municipalities' mapping systems. But it's important, I guess, without going too deep down just that one rabbit hole, it's important for us to be able to identify when a property has this kind of potential, and at least be able to guide our clients and say, hey, look, we don't know the extent of this wetland by just looking at the map, but what we do know is the municipality and the conservation authorities are going to trigger further study if you want to do something on that land and build within that area. And This can take time. An environmental impact statement could take months to complete the study, and depending on how it's received by the conservation authority and the municipality, it could go back and forth for additional months. If there's pushback and if they're saying, hey, look, we received your study, but we still see that there's significant evidence of this wetland, and they might require further testing, further studies in order, to determine what you could do on that property, or trying to remove a floodplain. So just beware when we're discussing properties. I would make Geo Ottawa one of the first things you pull up when you're investigating land. And any property that's got the ability to have some type of environmental concern is jump on Geo Ottawa, make sure all your layers are turned on, and figure out, if there's some potential problems. If you end up, let's look at a different property that's relatively, clean. If you had a client buying a piece of land, let's say it's this one right here, 4602 Dunrobin, looks like a great site. No environmental risks to speak of. The wetland looks like it's a couple properties away. I wouldn't have any problem showing a property owner or a potential buyer this screenshot of this, showing them that it doesn't appear to be encumbered by any type of environmental risks. That doesn't mean that this, if they, let's say, went to develop it, that doesn't mean that it wouldn't be a part of a larger forest complex. There's when you get into like large scale development, let's say somebody had the idea of creating an estate lot subdivision here. Now we know City of Ottawa specifically, there's a moratorium on country estate lot creation, so they wouldn't be able to apply for it anyways. But if they did, if this were in a municipality that, they were allowed to make an application for an estate lot, or maybe down the road when Ottawa finally lifts that moratorium, that doesn't mean that this particular land here isn't subject to other environmental constraints like larger forest complex, or other species that have habitat there. But for the purpose of a house or something, we can at least tell them, look, there's no wetland or no floodplain on the property. So we'll talk a bit more about, some of the other aspects of environmental in a minute, but for the purpose of this one, before we leave wetland and floodplain discussions, we showed how we can identify it or identify the lack of it. I'm going to show you a property where I actually moved some what the municipality was, what the conservation authority was calling floodplain. So this is in Dunrobin, and you'll notice here what I'm toggling around. There's a lot of wetland in this area, wetland and floodplain. We've got Constance Lake. Anytime that we've got a lake or a stream or a river, the term floodplain that we discussed becomes real important. And then we've got this larger, what is a provincially significant, if I zoom way out, you'll see what I clicked on, and I toggled over to the zone. You'll see this entire section is all EP3, which is environmentally protected land. This is one giant wetland complex, and everything in it is significantly protected. It's provincially significant habitat and wetland, and anything you do in there is going to be highly regulated. You'll notice there's no housing in there. There's no development. It is it is a wetland complex. This, if anybody knows this area well, the Bill Mason Center is in this area. It's a protected center where they, bring students to study habitat and the environment, and it's right in the middle of this complex. So I have a piece of land. If you guys look at this subject property here, I had a piece of land right sandwiched in between these two provincially significant wetlands. So on either side, if you notice, there's EP3, and this property in between them was owned by my family, and I was tasked to sell it. And before you see what you see now, you'll see basically this property in between these wetland complexes is relatively unencumbered from floodplain and wetland. It's open, as you see, without the overlay of the floodplain or the wetland on it, and even the regulated limits. When I was first tasked with selling this property, it looked like this. Anybody see the difference? Here's the property here. Everybody with me? Can you see my screen?
Looks like it was in the floodplain.
So the entire property was covered in what the municipality and the conservation authority was saying was floodplain. And I was trying to sell it, and there was no way for anybody to have enough space to build a house on it while it was like this. And what was interesting is this property was an old sand pit, and somebody had stripped it. I was in the sand business, but I didn't take this sand out. We bought this property to protect some sand resources in the area, but somebody had stripped this land and dug this pond. So it was an unnatural man-made pond. I brought this to the conservation authority, and I argued that this man-made pond was, even though it may, this area may be low, this man-made pond was not natural heritage system like a pond or a river, ditch, whatever. And I ended up getting this floodplain designation removed from the property. So in order to do that, I did an environmental impact statement. We had to do topographic investigations and a site plan, like a survey of the land. And through probably 4 to 5 months of time, I was able to convince the conservation authority that the land wasn't actually floodplain, and it was a man-made pond, and I was able to remove that floodplain designation. They took it off of the mapping system, and you'll notice I sold the property and somebody built a massive house on it right in the middle of where they said that the floodplain was. So this is not it ended up a good story, and it ended well. It's not going to be every time that you're going to be able to just magically move a floodplain or a wetland, but it is. I figured I'd bring it up to show you that things can happen, and often I see some type of variation when a homeowner tries to, if they're in an unevaluated wetland area and the homeowner is trying to negotiate with the conservation authority where they're going to put a house or a building. I often see changes happen. They can be difficult to navigate, but you can lobby to have things moved, but it takes time and energy and money um, to do this. But um, anyway, I'm hoping in seeing some of that you guys will, um, I guess, be able to identify some areas where you at least you need further investigation when we're looking for our clients, whether it's a buy or a sell. If you've got a property that somebody wants to help you sell, you have to do your homework beforehand, make sure that you're aware of the environmental constraints, because they grossly affect value. If you have a property that's just absolutely covered in wetland, it's going to affect the value of it because it'll constrain what somebody's able to do with it. So yeah, these things, they impact so much, the environmental constraints, like the buildable area that we discussed, where you can build on a property, how big you can build, whether what kind of insurance and financing you get, what the design of the land has to look like. Meaning, whenever you build your house, one of the most important parts about a development is the drainage. Is the water running into your house or running around it? Where's the water running to? So, especially in the country, in more rural lands, when you've got room to, bulldoze and slope the land and for it to drain properly, and you're not part of a subdivision or, an urban boundary, all the flooding or the drainage has already been managed. You've got stormwater management and these systems of ditches that have already been created, because when they created the subdivision, they had to do studies and they dealt with the drainage. But if you're looking at raw land, somebody that wants to build a house, or the drainage is a huge aspect, and these identifying these systems are going to help us dictate what has to happen in order to develop a property properly, and have it successfully drain and alleviate problems down the road. So those are definitely some red flags that, if you're seeing wetland, you're seeing floodplain. Certainly this when we see the actual provincially significant wetland, these are designated already by the province. You'll notice it's EP3. This is significant stuff, and if you've got land within this EP3, environmentally protected wetland, I'm going to go ahead and say it is very, very difficult to go and move, some land out of that provincially significant designation. It's not like an unevaluated wetland, or as far as I'm concerned, an error on a floodplain property, like I had just told you about this Thomas Dolan property. The environmentally protected wetlands, the provincially significant wetlands, they've been studied significantly, and the province is going to do their best to protect that land and not allow you to move it or remove it or within it. So be very aware of what's happening within those larger wetland complexes. That's you'll notice up into the Carp Hills, all these areas with significant wetland. I'll show you another one right here. It's the Carp Hills is another wetland complex. You'll notice it's just riddled with wetlands and regulated limits. So definitely something to watch out for is wetlands and water courses. Anybody have any questions about that before I move on to some
Yes, please. So just want to know about, like, I know this was majorly regarding for a wetland, for a floodplain and around that areas, and definitely we have to for ESA. And what if, like, I know, like, sometimes clients always ask for, like, in their street, like, just want to know that if even if they want to buy a land, a small parcel, or somewhere around, you can say, uh, so what are the basic things first they have to look after, even though it's uh, like a land somewhere around. If you go more farther than March Road or like to the north side, it's like a more country. I know basically other than the floodplain and other stuff, like what we have to consider. If we have to give them an idea, okay, these are the things you have to consider. It's not always that, okay, some people just want to keep the land for like a long time, like maybe after few years and all that, they want to do something, or maybe the value goes rise for them, and maybe any builder or developer might get something from them. Of course, ultimately the gain is ROI, like later on. So what should we like at least let them know and give them an idea to understand?
It's going to be slightly different um, based on their desired use. Um, Floodplain and wetland are, you know, the first ones to immediately identify.
Hmm.
But if somebody's looking for, and you mentioned a few different things, return on investment down the road, what's a good land to
Yeah.
purchase and hold. It really depends on what their intentions are and what they think the future highest and best use of a piece of land will be.
Mhm.
If somebody's buying a piece of land that they think will be good for development in the future, because we have to identify why why that particular piece of land will be more useful than another piece. For years in the rural areas, people subdivided land, made an estate lot subdivision, and that was a good higher and better use of let's say 100-acre parcel, that somebody could come and divide it up into a bunch of 2-acre estate lots, and that gave great ROI. It gave good value, more value to a piece of property than what you could just build a house on. Right now in the city of Ottawa, there's a moratorium on country estate lot creation, so that can't happen. But some other factors, let's say in a different municipality, you go just outside the city of Ottawa, right here is Arnprior, over here is Pakenham, Almont, Carleton Place. You can still build estate lots in those areas. So if somebody wanted to buy a piece of land to hold for the future, and they think they wanted to, or they wanted to subdivide it slowly over the years and do the studies themselves and work through the planning and subdivide it, I right now recommend going just outside of Ottawa in a different municipality, like maybe Carleton Place or Almont. Um,
Mhm.
but regardless of the area, some other things to look out for are, um, some of the other environmental aspects of the property. What is it? Is it field? Is it forest? One of the biggest ones are what is the soil type? If you've got a piece of land that's all like right on bedrock, if you go up into let's say you're going out further to the west end and you go up into the Burtlands area just before Almont, you'll notice there's a bunch of outcroppings where the bedrock is exposed. You know, there's nothing that can really grow on it. Few trees. The trees are smaller because there isn't any soil. Um, that's an environmental constraint of the property. If it's bedrock and you intend to develop it for a subdivision down the road, you're going to have to, number one, you won't be able to dig basements because it's too expensive to blast the bedrock out for your basements and pools.
Mhm.
You'll have to import all sorts of fill, for, for soils to grow grass. You'll have to bring in engineered fill to put to build the houses up for drainage. And um, so the cost to build on a piece of land that is directly on bedrock is prohibitive. So somebody might buy a piece of land just because they've got money, they're land banking, and they expect a good return in the future. But you really have to figure, okay, what am I expecting this property to exponentially grow into? and why? Because there's, if we're looking for exponential growth in value, it's because there's another use that um, is going to happen. Somebody's going to come and build a subdivision on it here, or there might be better ways in the countryside. Maybe you'll find a property that could be rezoned, or um, you know, along a highway or something that you can get it rezoned to. It might have some commercial potential, but what the soils are made up of are going to be a large constraint of the property as well, and may prohibit development in the future because of cost.
Hmm.
So, what kind of trees are we looking at? Um, let's say somebody wanted to build a subdivision, and we're looking at the trees, and all the trees are butternut trees, which we know are protected. Your cost of developing anything in, with a habitat like that, could be significantly larger as well. Um, but I would say your floodplains and wetlands are your primary
Concerns.
identifiers. A lot of people might just be looking to hold a piece of land for a house, and that's all it's going to be. So,
Hmm.
and at that point, we don't want to scare them off and have to start doing geotechnical analysis, like digging with excavators, or doing core samples to figure out what's in the ground, if they're just looking to have a homestead or a house or a hobby farm. Or I guess if they're going to farm it, you're going to want to know that there's some decent soil. um, Generally speaking, if there's a bunch of trees on a property, the soil type's not too bad. Really, like bedrock being exposed everywhere is would have a challenge for something like that. But it really depends on what the client's views are, and for future use of the land. What we're really going to identify, because we're not going to blow up deals because there's a butternut tree on a piece of land. One or two butternut trees, it wouldn't even stop a development. Like if you're gonna develop a subdivision, or some, put up you can remove a butternut tree. You might have to plant a few other butternuts somewhere else, or pay into a program that you know there's ways around some of the habitat and species at risk that you can do. But I would say your biggest ones to identify, if you've got your floodplains and wetlands figured out, you're most of the way there.
Yeah. Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Chris.
Um, so the let's see what we'll chat about next. There's um, let's just, for argument's sake, say that you're we're not in the city of Ottawa, or there isn't a moratorium because on country estate lot creation, because that's a very good mechanism to take a piece of land, and most people understand. If they have a piece of land and they divide it into smaller pieces, they're going to create value. Those smaller pieces are um, individually all add up together to be worth more than the original larger parcel. So, um, I guess let's discuss what would trigger some type of other study, like an environmental impact statement. We mentioned before, if we wanted to build a house on a piece of land, it could trigger a study. But if you were to actually apply for a subdivision in an area that allowed, estate lot subdivisions, this is where you're going to, have a development application will trigger all of those studies. So uh, when we create, whether it's a residential subdivision or maybe it's a commercial building, there's all sorts of rural areas that allow commercial. You've got, rural commercial zones. Whenever you're going to do something, a development application of large scale, you're going to have to go through what they call the site plan control process. And that's what's going to trigger all of those studies. Not only your environmental site assessment, but your environmental impact statements. And they're really going to have you study the habitat and make sure that what you're proposing to do takes the environment into consideration. And these studies can take a long time. Uh, Birds. Let's talk about the whippoorwill or the bobolink, eastern meadowlark. There's different turtles that are species, endangered species, blanding turtles, barn swallows, all sorts of species of flora and fauna, the trees, butternut trees. This habitat is of concern to the environmental conservation authorities. When you go to make a development application, it's often going, for something certainly in the rural area and that has potential habitat for some of these species, it's going to trigger these studies. And something you have to know is these studies might be lengthy and they might not all be able to be done at any time. If you're trying to study um, uh, for habitat, you might not be able to do the study in the middle of the winter. For eastern meadowlark, I think they're something to that nature. That bird, they have to do the study in a very particular month when they're I don't know if it's based on their breeding habits or whatever, but you might have one particular month of the year that you can do that study, and if you miss that month, you have to wait for the next year to study eastern meadowlark or whippoorwill and have the environmental consultants do that study. So you could have a piece of land, and if you make your application just after that month, you may have to wait an entire other year just to start the study. So some of these environmental studies can drag out over years and go back and forth for years if you're trying to develop a property. So sometimes it works out that things can be done quickly, but when you're talking about the environment, it's definitely prudent for us to let our clients know that these things can take longer amounts of time, and this is when we want to engage an environmental consultant, an environmental engineer, somebody like Patterson or Gemtech, or a planning firm like Novatech to guide you through the process to give proper advice to our clients into what they can expect for timing and cost through different development applications for environmental. They'll bring you through cost timelines and risks of what different outcomes will be. So and our role as realtors really, I think, is to ask the key questions, ask our clients what they intend to do with the properties, and really identify all the what we're going after, and do our research on these properties before submitting an offer so that we can adjust the conditional periods to reflect something that's realistic and set our clients up for the best experience. I've got all sorts of clients that are doing really really great things with property, moving the boundaries of value by creating something, and whether it's an application for a development or rezoning or all sorts of different mechanisms that we are using as real estate professionals to increase value and to make money with land and property. So it's but it's important that we're aware of the different aspects to guide them through the process, and in doing so, we're helping create value for them. When we identify a challenge that somebody else has walked away from because it's got environmental challenges, but we go through the process and we get it across the finish line because we knew enough about it to hire the right people to get through that challenge and still create the sale. We're helping people. We're creating value, and that's where we're going to shine and be worth our value. So we know when to recommend planners or biologists or engineers. You know, uh, at some point, geological testing for structural engineering or any of these matters that are constrained by the environmental aspects of a property or its particular properties. So I this was we're getting to the end of the hour. So I think this was a pretty good overview, but does anybody have any questions before we wrap up? I really want to make sure we're here for you, and if you've got any questions, now's the time. Well, I'll try to keep it to the hour. Those of you who know me know I can kind of keep chatting and run on, but I'll try to wrap it up here at the hour. But I want you to all know, you're part of the, you're part of the Northern Alliance family hanging around, and you're all welcome to give me a shout anytime to discuss. Certainly, if they call me the landman. If you see any land and you've got any questions, think of me, give me a call. I'm happy to guide you through. We're all here in this industry together, and I like to make sure that we're informed and giving people the best service that we can. So if you don't have any other questions, I'll wrap it up. Last chance.
Yeah, I just want to know about I definitely love this class, and I saw like I think it was my first time uh, with you guys, and I was looking at the calendar. So every week is it like a different topics regarding
It's
commercial
not
thing?
all commercial. We do a Northern Alliance training every week. We've got a few different partners, and we take turns running the training. I run a training for this Northern Alliance group about once a month, and I often pick a topic that's within my my expertise. So my topics are usually commercial or land related.
Hmm.
But the other Northern Alliance partners, there might be sales training or all sorts of different topics. We cover a wide range, but welcome. Hope your first time was enjoyable, but
No, that was good.
yeah,
Yeah,
we've got all sorts of different trainings that we discuss, but mine specifically tend to be
commercial.
on either commercial or land development, land,
Sure,
and
sure.
more the nitty gritty of real estate. Um, I don't know what you'd call it, but property aspects rather than the sales focus. I've got some other partners that focus on the
Okay,
actual sales themselves.
okay. No, that's good. Definitely, I will love to join more classes in the upcoming weeks and the months and all. So, and yeah, maybe I might shoot up some emails and all that regarding some land development questions, queries, and all that, or commercials.
Anytime,
Yeah.
anytime. Yep, give me a call. I'm easy to get a hold of. Um, Shoot me an email. But we appreciate you stopping by, and thanks for coming.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, Chris.
Thanks, Chris.
Okay, Huma, I'll give you a shout right now. We'll catch up.
Okay, sounds good.
All right. Thanks everybody for coming.
Take care, guys.
Good. Bye.